So, a very good morning to everyone here. Welcome to the third day of our international training program on crisis and disaster management. So, a quick recap of what happened yesterday. We heard from Mr. Rafiz Amirol, who spoke about strategic decision making, and we had Dr. Valentine Gandhi, who spoke about combating fake news during crisis and disaster management. And we had Mr. T.T. Myron, who shared a case study about his experience of working during the wartime in Sri Lanka. And we had our last speaker, Dr. Chindu, talk about the role of journalism during disaster and crisis. So if you happen to have missed any of these sessions, kindly check the YouTube channels of NIDM and MCCSWD lectures. So before we move into our session today, I would like to repeat a few general instructions which are strictly to be followed to avoid inconvenience during the program. First, kindly keep your microphones and videos turned off so that we don't have problem with the bandwidth. And there is no attendance sheet for the ones who are attending on the online platform, e-platform, that is WebEx. But however, the participants who are using the YouTube platform will be sent an attendance link in their chat box. Kindly fill in for your attendance. And if any of you all are having any trouble viewing the program on the platform, kindly use the YouTube link that will be sent on the chat box. And during the sessions, if you all have any queries, kindly put them in the chat box and do not interrupt while the speaker is presenting. So with that, we move on to today's session. We have three eminent speakers from NIDM, and our first speaker is Dr. Harjeet Kaur, who will talk to us about the concepts and principles of Disaster Management Act 2005. Dr. Harjeet Kaur is a young professional in the Coastal Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience Center in the Geometeorological Risks Management Division of the National Institute of Disaster Management. Prior to this, she was working in landslide risk management in Gangtok, Sikkim. Dr. Harjeet Kaur has published over 16 research publications in reputed international journals. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us, and over to you, ma'am.
Today we are going to discuss about the basic concepts, terms, definitions that evolved in disaster management. And now here, because we have only 15 minutes to complete this picture, this is a very good picture which defines disaster, hazard, vulnerability and capacity in one single frame. So disaster, according to UN definition, it is a serious disruption of a functioning of a society causing widespread of human, material or environmental losses exceed ability of the affected society to cope using only its own resources. And what is hazard? Or extreme natural, or you can say human made event that threatens to adversely affect human life, you can, or property or activity that uh, extent of causing disaster, because hazard leads to disaster. Then vulnerability. In the image you that a person is showing vulnerable. So in that context, we can define vulnerability as a degree of loss to given element at risk resulting from the occurrence of a natural phenomena, or you can say from anthropogenic activity. So what is element? Be a population, properties, economic activities, road infrastructures, public services, etc. that are at risk in a given area. And what is capacity? So capacity is the ability of coping and responding to our losses. So these are the some basics concept and definition that evolved in disaster management, because many times the student or the delegate mix these terminology, hazard and disaster, but these two terms are different. So by this can remind the definitions of hazard, disaster, and vulnerability. Now, the type of disaster. According to the High Power Committee country, they identify the disaster, 33 disaster and categorized into 5 subgroups. These are water and climate related disasters. Water and climate related disasters are floods, cyclone, tornadoes, hailstorm, cloudburst, etc. And geological related disasters are landslides, mud flow, earthquake, we can say dam failure and dam burst, mine fires. And chemically and nuclear related disaster are chemical related disaster, the industrial disaster, nuclear disasters, and the related disaster are the biological disasters, are pest attack, cattle epidemics, food poisoning. These are biological, or now we are facing a biological disaster is coronavirus, or you can say a COVID pandemic. Now, the accident related disaster. There is forest fire, urban fire, mine flood. These are categorized into the accident related disaster. Now, some basics concept that evolved in disaster management. Now, about a Disaster Management Act 2005. Here, before entering into law and regulation, I want to share a history evolved around DM Act. The year 1990 is very important in disaster history. It is also known as the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction, as declared by the UN General Assembly. The Indian government, at that time, Indian government had entered into the field of disaster management with a permanent and institutionalized setup for disaster management under the Ministry of Agriculture. But now institutionalized is under the Ministry of Home Affairs. The management cell was formed, drawing up a systematic, comprehensive, and holistic approaches towards disaster. After Malabar tragedy in 1998, which killed 380 villagers and 200, those lost their lives, and it was the time when disaster management policy was changed from through assistance to a holistic one. Consequently, the Disaster Management Division was moved under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Previous, it was under the Ministry of Agriculture. Now it is under the Ministry of Home Affairs. DM Act. DM Act 26 December 2005. The DM provides for necessary institution drawing up and monitoring the implementation of DM plans and sharing the basic for prevention, mitigation, disasters, and for undertaking a holistic, coordinated, and promote response to any disaster. In this lecture, of the DM Act will be discussed. Now the silent of Disaster Act. Disaster Management Act has 11 chapters with 79 sections. The Act provides for the effective management of disasters and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. It has defined disaster and DM in a new concept. It provides us an institutional mechanism for monitoring and implementation of plans. Then there is a state government have to as advise to amend their relief code. There is a provision for a state government to create disaster management authority and DDMA, that is District Disaster Management Authority for their state. This act has a provision for disaster fund, disaster mitigation fund at national, state, and district level. This is the DM Act. Now, I just give one overview. In DM Act, as I have told that there is 11 chapter where there is 79 subsection, and like chapter 1, it has a subsection under 1 to 02. There it gives a definitions and preliminary idea about the disaster related to DM Act. And chapter 2 with the subsection of 3 to 13, it defines responsibility of NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority. The State Disaster Management Authority roles responsibility were defined under the chapter 3, and the DDMA role and responsibility were defined under the chapter 4. So like this way, these are the chapter, and where all the related responsibilities, rules, regulations were explained under this chapter. So I'm not going to explain all these things. Now the concerned disaster role. As we know that the biological disaster under the biological disasters were dealt by the Health and Family Welfare Ministry, and the airplane related disaster were dealt by the Civil Aviation Ministry, and the chemical dealt by the Department of Atomic Energy, and all these ministries are work under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Legal institutional framework for our country. Legal framework has 4 levels, that is national level, state level, district level, and local level. Here in this picture, you can see National Disaster Management Authority, Prime Minister with 9 more members for laying down the policies, plan and guidelines for disaster management. The NDMA will be assisted by the NEC-NAC, National Executive Committee of National Authority to recommend guidelines for the minimum standard relief. These are the responsibilities of NDMA. Now about the SDMA, State Disaster Management Authority, which is chaired by the Chief Minister of the state. One of the members may be chairperson of the state authority by the Chief Minister. The state authority may constitute an advisory committee of experts, and it shall be responsible for laying down the policies and plans for the disaster management in their respective state. The state authority shall for providing minimum standard of relief and will be assisted by the state executive committee. Now after the SDMA, there is a DDMA, Disaster Management Authority. The state government shall establish a DDMA in each district of their state. The chairperson of the DDMA will be the collector or the district magistrate or the deputy commissioner of the district. The elected representative of member of a DDMA as an ex officio co-chairperson. The district authority as the district planning, coordinating, implementing body for disaster management. Now after DDMA, there is a local authority which shall ensure and employs and maintenance of resources so as to readily available for use in the event of disaster. It shall also ensure all the construction project under it conform to standards and specification laid down, and local authority shall carry out relief and reconstruction activities in affected areas within its jurisdiction. So after the institutional framework, there is a response to act when the disaster occurs in our country. So there is a NDRF force, that is National Disaster Response Force, where the section 44 to 45 Act provides for the constituting a NDRF for the purpose of specialist response to a threatening disaster situation or disaster under a Director General, that is the DG, to be appointed by the central government. So, and there is NIDM. NIDM is National Institute Disaster Management. Its role is development, capacity development, and research publication, mock drill to the state authorities and respective stakeholders. So this is all about the legal institutional framework was established in 2005. Now, all about DM Act fund. Under the Disaster Management Act, there is fund provided for during the disaster situation and after situations. Like there is a response fund, and there is a mitigation fund. So there is a National Disaster Response Fund by the central government and grants provided by any person or institution. And there is a National Disaster Mitigation Fund for mitigation projects. Now, the penal provisions, penalties, those act wrongly according to DM Act. The penal provisions is explained under the section of 51 to 60, where section 51 explains that if there is a 1 year imprisonment or fine or both, if any person obstruction result in loss of life or imminent danger, like given the direction given by the central or state authorities or DDMA, then there is a 2-year imprisonment with fine or false claim for the false claiming or for obtaining relief assistance under the section of 15.3, there is 2-year imprisonment and fine for misappropriation of money or material during the disaster condition. And under the section 54, there is a 1-year imprisonment or fine punishment for false warning. If somebody gave a false warning for a disaster, then that person is undergo for a 1-year imprisonment. Then in case of an offense by the government department or the head of the department, to be held guilty unless he or she proved otherwise, any other officer found guilty to be proceeded against and punished. And there is 1-year imprisonment or fine for refusal to perform any duty by government officer during a disaster. So these are some provisions related to DM Act. Now I think I exceeded time and I take 20 minutes, so sorry for that, but it's difficult to complete this act within a 15 minutes, but I am trying it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, so much for giving a clear and detailed outline about the Disaster Management Act. Next, we move on to Mr. Raju Tapa. Mr. Raju Tapa is a young professional in the National Institute of Disaster Management. Before this, he has worked as a research fellow in the Department of Science and Technology, Science and Engineering Research Board, and the Board of Research in Nuclear Sciences in major projects sponsored by the Department of GIS of Atomic Energy. He is an expert in the field of remote sensing and GIS and its applications of water resources, contaminant hydrology, groundwater, potential mapping, and landslides assessment. A few other instructions for the participants: kindly avoid spamming in the chat box because it makes it difficult for us to identify the questions. And also kindly mute your mics and your videos. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for this opportunity. Uh, like my earlier speaker, Dr. Harjeet Kaur, mentioned that in India, the concept of disaster management has evolved from an activity-based arrangement or setup to a purely temporary basis. Now to a more institutionalized structure. Like it was primarily from a relief-based approach to now a multi-dimensional approach. So just to move on, I will just like to give what I will be talking about the Sendai Framework, the Sustainable Development Goal, the Paris Agreement, just to give you a glimpse of how they came into existence, just so that you have an idea like how the disaster management have evolved through the decades. Like to start with, the United Nations General Assembly in 1990, they in IDNDR on 1st January 1990, they declared that the 1990s as the decade of international decade for national disaster reduction. Then the other important date, that was the first World Conference on National Disaster in Yokohama, Japan. It was in 1994. It was adopted in Yokohama for a safer world. Then in 1999, the International Strategy for Disaster Reduction was adopted, and the one of the key point, or you can say to June 2005, the Hugo Framework, which was the global blueprint for disaster risk reduction effort between 2005 and 2015. Its goal was to substantially reduce the disaster losses by 2015. And on March 2015, like member states, 183 member states adopted the Sendai Framework that we are hearing nowadays very often for disaster risk reduction in 2015 to 2030. And
your PPTs or not all.
PPT is not. Moderator,
Your PPT is visible, Raju.
Okay, it's visible. Okay, thank you. Okay, talking about the Sustainable Development Goal, the Millennium. Actually, before talking about Sustainable Development Goal, we should understand about the Millennium Development Goal. There were there were eight international goals that were set up in 2000 for the 2015, and this is how from the output of the Millennium Sustainable Goal, the Sustainable Development Goals have adopted. And the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is an international environmental treaty adopted on 1992, and that was at Earth Summit in January. And successor after the out from that, the Paris Agreement that we usually hear, dealing with greenhouse gases mitigation, adaptation, and finance, was signed up in 2015. So this is just a brief to start with. Sendai Framework, like Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, it was adopted, as I said, in March 2015 by representatives from 187 UN member states. The Sendai Framework builds on the knowledge and experience of the Hugo Framework for action, and after a series of analysis of the output of the Hugo Framework and years of consultation, like today we have a practical framework that will guide our action for the next 15 years up to 2030. So there are several improvements in Sendai Framework as compared to Hugo Framework, such as the scope. There is a stronger focus on the risk prevention. There is a guiding principle. There are 7 global targets that has been set up, And there is a clear articulation of the measure at national level, what should be done at the local level or the regional level and global level. And there is a strong mention of recommendation and health also. And the role of various stockholders are also defined very nicely. So, like I mentioned, there are seven global targets. There are 7 important targets that has been set up. And out of that 7 targets, 4 are the reduction oriented targets and 3 are the increase oriented targets. Like 3 reduction oriented target, like we have to reduce the number of affected people by disaster. We have to reduce the economic loss. We have to reduce the damage to medical and educational facilities. Like similarly, it aims to increase the national strategy support to developing countries and also access to early warning information. To achieve these targets, framework has 4 priorities of action. Like first is the understanding disaster risk. Then there is strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk, and investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. And the fourth and the important one is enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Now, how is Sendai Framework implemented in our our plan is like National Disaster Management Plan 2019. If you go like all the 4 priorities that I have discussed, it has been incorporated in the NDMP plan that has been prepared by NDMA with the priority in these following chapters. Okay, so this is how it is implemented. Now, moving on to the sustainable development goal. Like sustainable development is the development that meets the need of the present generation without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. So for sustainable development to be achieved, it is very crucial to harmonize 3 core elements, that is economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. So the Sustainable Development Summit was held in from 25 to 27 September at UN headquarters, New York. So the 2013 30 Agenda for Sustainable Development, Transforming Our World, which was agreed upon by the 193 member states of the UN nation, and it includes 17 sustainable development goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals, they are a collection of like 17 global goals and 169 targets designed to be and like blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. Like the Sustainable Development Goal set in 2005 by the United Nations, instead to be achieved by the year 2030. Actually, it is a roadmap to end global poverty, build a life of dignity for all, and leaving no one behind. That is the important word. It is also a call to work in a partnership and intensify effort to share prosperity, empower people livelihood, ensure peace, and heal our planet from the benefit of this and future generation. So another way to look at sustainable development goal is the 5 P's. The main focus of the 5 P's is to focus on the people, the well-being of the people, the focus on the protection of the Earth's ecosystem, to focus on the prosperity, continued economic and technical growth. We have to secure peace and also international cooperation. So the entire 17 sustainable goals, sustainable goals, can be divided. The first 5 goals focus on people, and followed by the goal number 6 to 15 focusing on the planet and the prosperity, and the 16th focus on peace and focus on the partnership. And talking about the desirable outcomes from the sustainable development goal, we need since the target is set up for 2030, there are certain desirable outcomes from the sustainable, like improving policy coherence, supporting inclusive growth and well-being. This is like especially crucial principle of leaving no one behind, ensuring that the most marginalized and exclusive communities do not fall off from the radar. We have to consider everyone and every city, and we are ensuring that the planet's sustainability, promoting partnership like government, international NGOs, private sector, and civil society will need to team up, whether it is a financial resource, technical technologies, knowledge sharing, etc. We have to come as a team, and having accurate data to inform the process and the mm, process to inform the process, because improved data quality leads to better decision making across any organization. The more high accuracy, high quality data you have, the more confidence you will have in your decision. So good data decreases risk and can result in consistent improvement in result. So now the Paris Agreement is an agreement within the UN framework, Convention on Climate Change, very commonly known as UNFCCC. It's dealing with the greenhouse gas emission mitigation, adaptation, and finance. Like it was signed in 2016 at the 21st conference of the parties called COP. It is also known as COP21 of the UNFCCC in Paris, France, and was adopted in 12th December 2015. So the Paris Agreement was adopted on like December 2005, and at the 21st session of the conference of this COP held in Paris. So this agreement builds upon the UNFCCC and brings together all the nations into a common cause to undertake ambitious effort to combat climate change and adapt to the effect with enhanced support to assist the developing country to do so. And the agreement at holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius, like above pre-industrial level, recognizing that this would significantly reduce the risk and impact of climate. So there is a significant convergence between the problem that disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation seek to address. Like the region already exposed to climate related hazard and effects will be at greater risk due to a projected increase in the frequency and or intensity of those hazards and effect because of global climate change. So here, I would like to introduce a term called intended nationally determined contribution. So INDC, it stands for intended nationally determined contribution. Like before several months of the conference, parties like all the countries were asked to submit their INDC, which consists of plan, policy, measures, etc., which they particularly like to that the country will undertake to achieve the objective of the convention. Some important noteworthy points to understand India's stand are like what India INDC consists of, like propagating sustainable propagating sustainable livings, adopt climate friendly and clear path, reducing emissions, like 40% cumulative electric power generation, and so on. Like okay, so India has taken up various strategies adopted in India, which will to ensure that India fulfill its INDC, like that is a nationally determined contribution, such as National Solar Mission that aims to increase the power generation by solar energy from 20 gigawatts to 100 gigawatts by 2022. And there are other also, like road transport and proposed solar powered toll plaza, like road transport and highway ministry. They propose that solar powered toll plaza in order to reduce the carbon footprint of the toll plaza. In addition, there were like a nationwide campaign for energy conservation that targets to save 10% of energy consumption. Mm. And like as you heard, like national smart city mission, it is like a smart city mission. It is a mission is an urban renewal and retrofitting program by the government of India with the mission to develop smart cities across the country, making them citizen friendly and sustainable. And also the Hriday National Heritage City Development and Yojana that was launched on like January 2015 with an aim to of bringing together urban planning, economic growth, and heritage conservation in an inclusive manner to preserve the heritage character of each heritage city. And also Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation. It was launched by the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, in June 2015, and with a focus to establish infrastructure that could ensure adequate, robust sewage network and water supply for urban transformation by implementing urban revival projects. Swachh Bharat Mission or Swachh Bharat Mission or Swachh Bharat Abhiyan or Clean India Mission. That was a countrywide campaign from 2014 to 2019 to illuminate like open defecation and improve solid waste management in urban and rural areas in India. The objective of the mission also include eradication of manual scavenging, generate awareness, and bring about a like behavior change regarding sanitation practices and to increase the capacity at the local level. And there was a slogan "Zero Effect, Zero Defect," which was given by Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, and it signifies two things: like production mechanism wherein production has zero defect, and production process which has zero adverse environmental and ecological effect. So zero effect and zero defect. And also apart from this, there are some like other faster adaptation and manufacturing of hybrid and electric vehicles. There are many. I have just pointed out few. So now the how the sustainable development to conclude my presentation, I would like my presentation. I would like to say that these three global convection, or you say Sendai Framework, Sustainable Development Goal, Climate Change Adaptation, this agenda all together, they have created a comprehensive framework to reduce climate and risk vulnerability and increase resilience. Although like the Paris Agreement focused specifically on climate change mitigation and the sustainable framework on disaster risk reduction, these agenda all understood the message that it is impossible to have an impact and prompt significant change if solutions are vertical or isolated from each other. So a transition to a low carbon society not only will mitigate the intensity of change in the climate, but also indirectly contributes to the creating a resilient society and your economy. Thanks for your patience and for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much about sharing with us about regarding the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk and Reduction, and also briefly explaining about the SDGs and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. And thank you so much for the insights, sir. Next, we have Mr. Anil Kattait, who is also a young professional in the Center for Hill Area Development in the Geometeorological Risk Management Division of the National Institute of Disaster Management. He is a postgraduate in the geology with over 8.5 years of experience in the field of landslide hazard management and disaster management. He has previously worked with prestigious organizations such as the United Nations National Development Program, National Institute of Urban Affairs, and the Central Road Research Institute. And he will talk to us about the Prime Minister 10-point agenda and the National Disaster Management Plan guidelines. Another reminder to all the participants, kindly use the chat box only to post your questions and queries and avoid other messages. Thank you, sir, and over to you now.
Hello, everyone. Hope you all are doing well amid global crisis of COVID-19 and implementing all the necessary measures for safeguarding your family from this pandemic. I will be discussing Prime Minister 10-point agenda on DRR and National Disaster Management Plan. As you all know, India is one of the highly disaster-prone country in the world, exposed to recurring devastation due to cyclone, earthquake, landslides, flood, drought, and so on for many decades, or you can say centuries. And when you look back at the history of disaster, you will find that up to late 20th century, it was mostly devoted to relief-centric approach. But in 21st century, some new interventions like Disaster Management Act 2005, National Policy on Disaster Management 2009, National Disaster Management Plan 2016 and 19. These were the intervention which shift the tone of subject to holistic one. During the Asian Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in 2016, Honorable Prime Minister of India, Sri Narendra Modi, highlighted a 10-point agenda roadmap on disaster risk management that concisely includes issues, tools, approaches to address almost all the critical challenges in achieving sustainable development objectives, focusing on local disaster management system, academic capacity strengthening, and harnessing technology advance. So the very first point of the 10-point agenda of the Prime Minister was all development sectors must imbibe the principles of disaster management. To an estimate, direct natural disaster losses amount to 2% GDP of India's. Mainstreaming disaster risk reduction concern in development planning can help in effective distribution of resources, uh, towards protection of life, assets, restoration of productive system, livelihoods, regaining market access, rebuilding social and human capital, physical, psychological health. This will ensure all development projects, whether they are airport, roads, or any other infrastructure and structure, are built to appropriate standard and to contribute the resilience of community they seek to serve. To achieve this agenda, Honorable Prime Minister of India, Sri Narendra Modi, announced a global coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure at UN Climate Action Summit that was held in 2019 in New York for promoting disaster resilient infrastructure and to generate new knowledge for hazard risk assessment, disaster resilient technology, and mechanism for integrated risk reduction infrastructure financing. The second agenda was to work towards risk coverage for all. Due to increase in intensity and frequency of natural disaster worldwide, emphasis will be on coverage for all, starting from poor household to small and medium enterprises to multinational corporations. Risk assessment should ensure that economy has financial resources to build and recover, which is critical to growth and effective risk mitigation. Government of India have taken many initiatives in for this agenda, like Jan Dhan Yojana, Suraksha Bima Yojana, Fasal Bima Yojana, and so on. The third agenda was increase greater participation and leadership of women in disaster risk management. During a disaster, it is considered that women, along with children and elderly peoples, are more vulnerable. Apart from biological reasons, social and cultural factors are also associated in increasing the vulnerability of the women. Sendai Framework also recognize that gender, disability, age, culture, perspectives are needed in all policies, practices, and that women and their participation are critical to effectively managing disaster risk, designing resources, and implementing gender-sensitive disaster risk reduction policies, plan, programs, and adequate capacity measures to be taken to empower women for preparedness as well as build their capacity for alternative livelihood means in post-disaster situations. Still today, the participation of women in planning, designing, implementing, monitoring emergency programs are on a low-key profile. Therefore, it is need of our to increase greater participation and leadership of women in disaster risk management. The fourth agenda was regarding invest in risk mapping globally. By characterizing region according to their level of vulnerability, it is possible to design and redesign, modify the development plans and activities over that particular land. Risk and hazard mapping gives a better understanding of hazardous location and helps in advance planning for managing the disaster consequences of the hazards. Sustainable development goals and Sendai framework also highlights the importance of risk mapping for holistic disaster management at all levels. The fifth point was leveraged technology to enhance the efficiency of disaster risk management efforts. Use of technology in mapping, vulnerability assessment, and disaster response, as well as preparedness early warning, can enhance the efficiency of disaster risk management. For example, in Cyclone Felin of 2013 in Odisha, timely forecasting by Government of India have saved millions of lives. That is an example how technology can save millions of lives. Next agenda was to develop a network of universities to work on disaster issues. There is huge mandate and need for capacity building and professionals in disaster risk management field. This National Institute of Disaster Management has established Indian universities and institution network for disaster risk reduction to build communities safe and resilient to disaster through education, knowledge creation, research, technology, and dissemination. The next agenda was to utilize the opportunity provided by social media and mobile technology. The role of social media gained momentum and became an integral part of disaster management cycle. Social media become a vital tool in helping government agencies and other resource rescue organizations by disseminating information to wider audience. Each disaster finds its space on social media for information exchange and plays an important role in disaster risk reduction by raising the public awareness to the forecasting of disasters. But there is also need to maintain and regulate social media activities which can be used for spreading wrong information. For example, like during the Nepal tragedy in 2015, the media played an integral part in disaster response in filling the void where cell services were lost. These are the some role of social media and mobile technology. Like in pre-disaster, they can be used for disseminating early warning forecasts, spreading preventive measures, help crowd management, and during and after disaster, they can help in the rescue operation, rehabilitation process, relief operations. The next agenda was to build local capacities and initiatives. Disaster disrupts the functioning of community or society, causing human, material, economic, environmental losses, thereafter affecting human development as a whole. The need to develop the capacity and skills of the community is the need of hour, so that they can deal with disasters as a way of life instead of a curse. Hugo Framework for Action and Sendai Framework have promoted people-centric approach for early warning, keeping in the mind demography, gender, culture, livelihood, and other characteristics of the community. To enhance the capacity of community, Government of India introduced Abda Mitra scheme to train community volunteers with the skills that they would need to respond to the community's immediate need in the aftermath of a disaster, enabling to undertake basic relief and rescue tasks from emergency situation whenever emergency services are not readily available. The next agenda was ensure the opportunity to learn from disaster is not wasted. Whether successful or failure one, every story holds valuable lessons for the future. However, much of the experiences inside lessons are lost as time passes because they are not documented in way they can be for they can be to retrieve and utilize whenever needed. Therefore, appropriate documentation of every disaster is utmost. Globally, disaster risk reduction might have seen paradigm shift from relief and response to preparedness mitigation approach. But in developing countries, the concept still holds the back space or to most in policy documents and lack apathy from the policymaker practitioner in its real implementation on ground. The last agenda of bring about greater cohesion in international disaster response. Most of the regions of the world are prone to multiple disasters, and the complexity of risk is growing and challenges of managing emergencies intensifying gradually with changing landscape, demography, land use, and uninterrupted ecological degradation. The aftermath of the disaster is preceded by the need for large, multifaceted response, recovery, reconstruction, as well as rehabilitation, lack of adequate knowledge, capacity, plan management skills often jeopardize the very objective of disaster management programs. Thus, it is utmost important to bring about a greater collaboration in international disaster response. Like in case of Nepal earthquake 2015, the emergency was far exceeded by size and nature of devastation that earthquake brought to it. Thus, a number of countries provided helping hand to Nepal to overcome the aftermath of that disaster in 2015. Was all 10-point agenda of Prime Ministers for DRR. Now, National Disaster Management Plan. Section 10(2)(b) of Disaster Management Act 2005 mandated National Executive Committee to prepare the national plan to carry forward the inheritance of Disaster Management Act 2005, National Policy on Disaster Management 2009, and to shoulder the current global best practices and knowledge in all the horizon of disaster management. The National Disaster Management Plan was formulated in the year 2016 by National Disaster Management Authority. The plan provides a framework and direction to all the government and all the government departments, agencies for all phases of disaster management, mitigation, prevention, preparedness, response, recovery. It was the world's first national plan on disaster management that was lined up with Sendai of 2015. The National Disaster Management Plan was again revised in 2019, integrating rationally of Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, Paris Agreement on Climate Change, Sustainable Development Goals, as well as Honorable Prime Minister's 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction. The plan adopted the classification system that characterized natural hazards into 5 major categories and is used globally for Sendai Framework monitoring. The national plan also provides planning framework and directions to government agencies for directions to government cross-sectoral department agencies under 6 areas for each hazard. The thematic areas were understanding the risk, interagency coordination, investing in DRR structural as well as non-structural measures, investing in capacity development, as well as the last one, climate change risk management. Further, these thematic areas were divided into different sub-thematic areas, and the activities mentioned in the framework are grouped under overlapping time frameworks concluding by 2020 for short term, 2027 for medium term, and 2030 for long term. These were the 5 categories of disaster that was adopted by National Disaster Management Plan. This is how in disaster management plan every and each disaster in each and every disaster there is mentioned which center agencies will what are the responsibilities of which center agencies and what are the responsibilities of state agencies. Likewise, for all the able to move my slides. All 6 thematic areas. The plan have district of functions between center and states, their departments and agencies. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much, sir, for briefing us and explaining about the 10-point agenda of the Prime Minister, which Prime Minister has suggested, and also about the information that you gave for the guidelines. So a few instructions to all the participants and some information and few answers to the questions that have been asked regarding the feedback forms. The link will be sent on the chat box towards the end of the session today. And there is no feedback form for every single day. It's one feedback form for all the 3 days, and that will be sent towards the end of the session. Kindly wait patiently. And for the attendance sheet, once again, as we said in the beginning, The attendance for the participants attending on the e-platform, that is WebEx, will not be required because there is an automated attendance sheet that will come out. But the ones who are attending and using the YouTube platform, the link will be sent on the chat box. Kindly fill in your attendance to get the attendance. With this, we move to the next half of our session today, where we will be looking at the human groups, vulnerable groups that are being affected during the disaster and crisis. And for this, I hand over and call Mr. Ananya to take over. Thank you.
So let's move on to the next session. Before that, I request all the participants to kindly keep your microphones and your videos turned off throughout the program. Coming up next, we are going to have sessions on human rights aspect during crisis by two speakers from different countries who will share their views and perspectives on the effect that disaster has on the vulnerable groups in their respective countries. First on board, we have Dr. Prince Solomon Devdas. Dr. Prince Solomon Devdas has been an assistant professor at the Department of Social Work, Madras Christian College from August 2000. He is the president of the Nilgiris Wayanad Tribal Welfare Society and was on the advisory board of Compassion International and LDP, Karuna Bal Vikas. He represented India in the We Can campaign in the National Assembly in Sri Lanka organized by Oxfam International in 2007. He also worked with the Department of Social Defense, Government of Tamilnadu, as a consultant for suicide prevention and child protection from 2014 to 2017. We are happy to have you with us, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Ananya, and the participants. I think we had a very good 3 technical sessions, which we were able to see. And now I'm going to put it on screen share. Just wait a minute. Okay, so the topic is on effect of crisis and disasters on vulnerable groups in India. So from the morning, I think Dr. Harjit spoke on what is vulnerability and what is a hazard and what is a disaster. And that made it easier for me. I don't have to explain to you. So there are different vulnerable groups in different parts of the world, and I'm going to focus some of it in India. Though I would like to speak elaborately, but I'm going to speak to you on the different groups, and then probably 1 or 2 examples I will be able to share it with you in the next 10 minutes that is given to me. So what is vulnerability? I think generally when we talk about vulnerability, we always think about the children, the women, a person with disabilities are the most vulnerable groups in disaster situation. Any disaster that strikes, I think this 3 category of people are the most vulnerable. But there are lots of other people also who's part of the vulnerability factor or vulnerable or the types of vulnerability that we talk about. So let me move on and give you a description on what are the other groups that is part of the vulnerability.
Hi, sir.
Okay. So there are, I think I already mentioned to you, children, women, differently abled are also vulnerable in any disaster situation. If you take children, normal children, institutionalized children, then children without, parents who are living in a community. The same thing with the women, single-headed families or women-headed families. Those are areas that in vulnerability among the women, it's even more difficult. They'll face difficulty during this disaster situation. Differently abled, especially in a community setup, when there are differently able children, at least there are parents to take care. What about institutionalized care when there are many children? So the situation is totally different. There are also particular caste groups which are also vulnerable because of the hierarchy that we have in particular to our society. I can very well remember when we were working for the tsunami in the South India, in the coastal banks. It is one particular caste group was involved only in selling the fish. So when the tsunami was hit, and then the main fishing village was given all the relief materials. When we were visiting this particular group of people, they said we were not reached out at all because they thought only the fishermen was affected by tsunami. But actually, there is a group of people who dependent on their livelihood of the fishing. They were totally being outcast. So sometimes, even particular caste groups, I think sociologists, social workers, I think government officials, I think they really need to be opening our eyes during the disaster situation on seeing what are the vulnerable groups and how, we need to combat and how we need to support them during that time. Institutional care, when I say institutional care, it can be even as simple as hospitals or a home for the mentally retarded women or men, or for children, or a foster home, or it can be anything, or an elderly home. So institutional care also face a vulnerability during this time, because that is one of the major areas of concern. When there are more people, more elderly people in one particular space, and when, let's say, I think in Chennai floods in 2015, we were rushing to places where the elderly people were stuck. So sometimes we had to bring in a boat. Sometimes we need to supply foods. There are different things that we need to do. So that's one of the vulnerable group. Then particularly vulnerable tribal groups. I put it with intention because generally tribal groups in India, they are there in different parts of the country. Some of them are exclusively in a forest, or they're segregated, or they're isolated. Some of them are there in the semi-urban setup, and some of them even there in the fringes of the urban setup. So in that, the government of India has beautifully categorized PVTG, particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So this category of people, around 75 of them are there, and they are even more vulnerable than the usual tribal group people. They are usually isolated because of land. They don't have a permanent land. They don't have much of education. They don't have access to a lot of things that is provided for the normal usual citizens. So that is PVTG. They are also a vulnerable group. Now I'm moving to the next one, physical and mental health. When we say vulnerable group, it is not just a category. I think sometimes physical illness can also bring in and hamper a vulnerability factor. So physical vulnerability, and also mental health. People with mental health issues, probably it is very, very difficult for people to move or evacuate, or there are lots of issues regarding that. Then there are some types. I think the general types, I think we all know it very easily: physical, social, economic, and political and environmental. I think I've given some example on physical, which I've already dealt with. The social, for example, pregnant women during vulnerable situation, a lactating mother during a vulnerable situation, in a disaster situation, how would they react? How can they be taken to safety? How their needs can be met? I think those are areas that when we say when we talk about disaster management, we need to plan. Economic, I think economy is badly one of the major areas of in a disaster. Especially, we all know about this pandemic and the daily wages. We talked about a lot on migrant workers. So it doesn't affect only the daily wages. It can also affect the corporate. So when we say daily wages to corporates, I think it is a large gamut of group where many people can be affected. Political, in some countries that I have visited and traveled, there are some places where the people do not have a place to express their views, or the need perspective, or the felt need that cannot be expressed. So but we need to be blessed to have to be in India that we have democracy where we are able to at least express what we feel. So environmental. So these are some of the things. Now I'm going to quickly go on to one of the examples. So then probably you'll understand how in vulnerable for this vulnerable group, how we can respond to it. When I say I or we, as you know, this training program is jointly organized by the Department of Social Work, Madras Christian College, and NIDM and NDRF. So as a department in the past, we have responded to different disasters. Gujarat Earthquake, tsunami. During tsunami, Gujarat Earthquake, we are mainly focusing on collecting relief materials. During tsunami, I remember very clearly, nearly for 1.5 months, nearly for 6 weeks, the whole department was closed, and we were living in the nearby the fishermen folk, the fishermen villages, and we were doing rehabilitation and relief work. Kumbakonam fire accident, I think morning very beautifully, Dr. Hajit was categorizing accident-related disaster. I think I'm sure some of you would remember in 2004, nearly 97 children were charred to death in a school because of a fire accident. And as a department, we responded nearly for 10 days. We were staying there in that town and meeting up all the parents in psychosocial rehabilitation on how to take care of their mental health, even during this loss and grief period. Chennai floods, for example, I think we were working for nearly 1 or 2 months continuously on the relief, and the rehabilitation work is still going on from the department. Vardha cyclone, Kerala floods again. We went for a 2-week psychosocial camp. We were going to some particular areas where it is heavily affected. And as a department, we closed the department for 10 days, and we full students and the staff members, we stayed there, and we were trying to work with the Dalit communities there in Kerala. Then COVID-19 pandemic, I think again an issue that that we need to respond as, if you can call it, a disaster. Migrant workers, we were working right from the month of April and May, and also for the PVTGs, that is particularly vulnerable groups. What happened after Chennai floods during 2015? During the Chennai floods, what happened was, the floods came, and then there was a disaster. There are so many people who were affected. So as a department, we were thinking, what should we do as a student community, as colleges? How can we work for this vulnerable community? Then we got a chance to work with the community, identify a community called Irular. They're part of the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, which is categorized by the government of India, who are living in small isolations in hamlets, are in and around Chennai and the districts around Chennai. So we started to go there during the flood time, and then we started to visit them, and then we initiated something called Field Action Program. And so it is an initiative of the department. It's a post-disaster rehabilitation work. It is basically to bridge the social gaps, and it is also to make sure that there's a campus community connect is there. When we say vulnerable group, how do we work in ground zero? And that's what we understood. One of the things that some of you who would know, that if you're a social worker, in social work program, there is something called field work, which they usually place in an institution. So what we did, we removed our students from the agency, and then we started directly placing them in this community and say, let's do a need assessment. So when we went there, after a heavy flooding, we saw this particular irregular group, the tribal group. They were living like this with scabies, and you can see the hut that is made. This is how they were living there. And economy was a major issue hit. Education, children were not going to school, and electricity was not there. There was no drinking water facility and things like that. So a group of students, 5 students, joined together, and we started working along with the faculty members. We started working with this particularly vulnerable tribal group. So what we did a need assessment, and this is what we came up with. And you would see now, this is the house that the students raised money, and then we built 13 houses for them during that time. Now, I'm not trying to say this is the model, but this is one of the models where an educational institution, a small department with 5 faculty members and 45 students, we could impact a small community like this. So we started off with this, and then it went on to a restroom for them. Then we did a livelihood program on mushroom cultivation post-disaster. Now, all these things happened within the next 6 months. That was the beauty of this program. So people were responding to this. And then you can see education. Now, the government does a program on education for all. Now, this particular children will not go to school because their parents keep moving. They are nomadic for in search of jobs. So what we did, we tried to arrange from Education for All. We tried to arrange a vehicle for their village to the nearby school, so that by every day an auto will come and pick these children and then drop them in the school and then again bring them back. That helped them to go to school again. Electricity. In fact, we still work on this this issue on electricity. There are a lot of isolated communities, and we call it "Go Light the World." So we want to make sure that every community, irregular community, is lighted up. There are lots of people. They live in a small shack or in a small hut. So we are still, even last month. We've been in the field. We've been working on making sure that they get electricity. I think beautifully the previous presenter talked about the solar mission, national solar mission. I think that is exactly where we are getting towards, where we are making sure that everybody at least have a solar panel and that they have a light in their home. So this is about the PVTG water taps, which was never there. Now they have access to water. Now, when I say PVTGs, now this particular group, and then we've been working here for the last 3 years now. Now this has come again and again. Now even during this pandemic, again their livelihood is affected, and that's why we have started working towards that. I'm sure some of you would have heard this word during this pandemic. There is a thing called shadow pandemic. So when we say vulnerable groups, and then there is shadow pandemic. Shadow pandemic is something where the effects of this crisis, the effects of this pandemic, what are the other effects? For example, people going into depression, people going into mental health issues because they are locked up in home. In a typical PVTG group, like an irregular group, a tribal group, usually there is no livelihood options. It's drying up. Livelihood options are drying up. They could not move because local transport is not there. So just to make it as a case study that I just presented to you what a PVTG is. Now, these are some of the things that we did during the time, so that news items we put it so that people are aware of it, and there are more and more people came to help in this mission. So I'm sure on the first day we did a session on the role of youth and the educational institutions, also by one Dr. Chowsing from Taiwan. He was talking about it. I think that's a key role. I'm an educator and a practitioner of social work, and I believe that if every educational institution can work in ground zero on any particular area, on any particular group, I'm sure the last presenter beautifully said, building local capacities and initiatives. I think that is what we were able to trying to do, connecting our neighborhood and trying to see the vulnerability factors, what are the vulnerable people and how we can identify them and how we can take up at least one area and start working towards it. Now, I know disaster management is not just an educational institutions issue. It is from the government side, from the non-governmental side, the non-profit organizations, and of course, the local government. I think Kerala is the best model. The strengthening of the local model. I think that is something that really, is powerful in working towards it. When I was talking about the Kumbakonam fire accident, I still remember how much we were able to get into every home and trying to reach out to the people, and then how they were welcoming, because that is something that we were doing it along with the government, during that time. Then what are the other things that we can do when we talk about vulnerability, and what have we done from our experiences? One is we had a mental health center post tsunami for nearly 3 years in villages near Madras. So for 3 years we were running a mental health center that helped people to come, and then we also were able to encourage children to go to higher studies and motivating them. And mental health programs are conducted for all the women, especially people who lost a lot of life during that time. We still do advocacy, building houses, education for all, arranging transport. We also work very closely with the government, especially in Thiruvannamalai. There is a project called Abdul Kalam Puram. Again, a rehabilitation program post-flood during 2015. We were working with them in handholding the irregular community during that time. So ultimately, the livelihood is the prime focus. So several training programs and all these things. But please remember, the vulnerable groups are there, and I think our focus definitely need to be there on the vulnerable groups. One of the biggest lessons that we have learned in about working with these vulnerable groups is after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I would even say it takes a disaster sometimes to identify there are more and more needs in the community around us. I think that's the way that I have picked up in the last few years to understand the Nelson Mandela's quote. There are many more hills to climb. I'm sure each one of us in our own area, in our own respect, in our own places where we live, I'm sure we can identify them. And during a disaster situation, I'm sure that we can respond very, very positively. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Speaking about the vulnerable groups in India and also pointing out the major aspects in which they were mainly vulnerable and associated with. Drawing parallels from another country, we have Comrade Sunny Ofe to share with us the effects of such disasters on the vulnerable groups of Nigeria. Comrade Sunny Ofe is an environmental and human rights activist from Nigeria living in the Netherlands. He is the executive director of the NGO Hope for Niger Delta campaign. He has been widely involved in the political activism and documentation of the effects of illegal oil refineries and the lives of people in the Niger Delta region. In 2010, his NGO organized the first ever international peace conference in the Niger Delta region, and for 3 years, from 2017, he presented the cases of minority communities in the Niger Delta region to the United Nations Conference on multiple issues in Geneva, Switzerland. We are extremely glad to have you on board with us, sir. Over to you.
My name is Comrade Sonny Ofe, an environmental and human rights activist from the Niger Delta. The Niger Delta is an oil-producing region of Nigeria. Despite the huge oil reserve, the people suffers from environmental damages resulting from oil extraction by the oil multinational companies. In 2009, I visited the communities around the two biggest deep-sea offshore oil drilling platforms. Unfortunately, the people living in those communities have no schools, electricity, and the worst situation is that they have no clean pipe-borne water. During my visit in 2009, as you can see from this video I recorded, the whole communities drink from this parched, improvised water well containing bad, unhygienic water.
Look at the water we are drinking. See my stomach. And the water we drink with this, so they can help us. Every small houses for town. Now they use tap. They make clean water and they drink. But look at me, chief. A whole high chief. They drink this water every day at the porch. Every day at the porch. If you see my porch, we're not going to run away from this place. It's caused by this water. So we're going to come. All of us join together. Come and help us for this. Look at the place now. No block building, nothing. Look at this. This is the houses. But we are host community to so many oil companies, uncountable companies operating in our territory. Nothing. Look at the community. Take all the whole of this community and go and tell them. This is why we are suffering from. Look at the highness. Yeah, nothing. Huh? Bilabri community. This is Bilabri community. Dodo River. Dodo River. Which you people know better. This is Dodo River, Bilabri community. Bilabri 1. We have Bilabri 2 there. And there are so other communities. We are dying.
Unfortunately, Chief Dixon Saidi died this year, 2017, at the age of 56 after a brief illness. No one is certain if his death is connected to having drunk this terrible water since he was born. May his soul rest in perfect peace. In 2014, when we visited again to observe this condition of the people, it was sad to also realize that after 5 years, the situation hasn't even changed. The traditional ruler couldn't hide his anger and frustration when he told us about the neglect of the people by the government and the oil companies.
I don't know what they are telling you people at Netherlands. Shell is doing nothing. So these are committees. Nothing.
Something so stupid and terrible, and terrible, and terrible, oh, so terrible. I know if it's real,
So is this the water the community drinks from?
Yes. And you see, see some of the children walking inside it. And those are what is called frogs and toads.
Okay.
Born inside
the same water they're
the
drinking?
same water there. They will drink from the same water.
The government and the multinational oil companies must ensure that the people living around the area of business must get the simple basic things of life, which must include clean water.
Good morning. My name is Comrade Sonny Ofe. I'm an environmental and human rights activist from the Niger Delta. I am based currently in the Netherlands. I speak on minority issues, particularly as it affects the people from the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. The Niger Delta region of Nigeria is the oil-rich region of Nigeria that has put Nigeria as the 8th largest exporter of crude oil within the OPEC membership. And currently, Nigeria is ranked #1 in terms of oil and gas production in Africa. However, in the course of oil extraction, my people and where I come from, particularly the Ogoni area of the Niger Delta, have been marginalized, have been facing a lot of environmental and human rights consequences as a result of oil extractions in the area. And that has also affected the environment because our major occupation is fishing and farming. And in the course of oil extraction, there has been a lot of environmental damages to the soil. And of course, in the course of oil drilling, there is bound to be accidents that result from either corrosiveness of oil pipelines that leads to oil spill. And most of the time, this oil spill into the farms of people and then spill into the waters and kill the habitation in the water. So the problem we currently have is that because of the environmental, the climate change situation, so most of the time we're having a problem that people whose land and water has been contaminated, there is no compensation for them. So therefore, our major occupation has systematically been taken away from the people, and it has led to health conditions. It has led to poverty. It has led to urban migration, and so we're currently advocating and calling on the international community, particularly the international agencies like the United Nations and also the regional agencies like the European Union, to put pressure on the multinational oil company, majority of which are coming from the United States and Europe, to at least maintain the basic minimum standard of operation within the region in order to see that the occupation of the local people can be restored. And where there are environmental damages, there should be proper cleanup and proper remediation in the environment so that the people can have a stake in the resources that is also coming from the region, and that is one of the threats that we currently face. And that is also another dangerous part of it, is that we're currently faced with this situation where most of the youths are unemployed. Most of the youths do not have the means to get education. And then, of course, this has led in the past to militancy, to uprising, and young people taking arms to not only fight the government, but also fight the multinational oil company. That is the situation we currently find ourselves. And that is why I find this discussion very meaningful in a way that it speaks on the challenges that minority people are facing in regards to the current situation, whether political, whether in terms of corporate greed, and until we find a solution to it, this could be another dangerous situation that can lead to some kind of crisis.
Thank
So
you,
that is, yeah, that is a bit of my presentation, summary of my presentation this morning.
Thank you so much, Sunny sir, for your valuable information. Right now, we'll go to the question and answer session. The next question is for Anil Kattait. Hello.
Please.
So the question is, to what extent the paradigm shift of preparedness and mitigation is followed in the case of COVID-19?
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah. To what extent the paradigm shift of preparedness and mitigation is followed in the case of COVID-19?
Actually, in COVID-19 case, it was a national emergency, but as per the constitution, the government can't announce any national emergency based on the health sector. That's why they have invoked a Disaster Management Act and Epidemic Act. All the decision, whatever government guidelines government have introduced were based on the Disaster Management Act of 2005.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. The next question is for Raju sir. Sir, what is the status of achievement of targets and the indicators of SDG?
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry. I thought my thank you for this question. Actually, I can see in the comment box most of the participant has a question regarding how the goals achievements are reviewed and all. Say that yes, NITI Aayog is the key nodal agency who is publishing the all the updates of the sustainable development goal. Like the government of India is fully committed to the 2013 agenda, including the sustainable development goal. Like there is a convergence of Indian national development goal and agenda of like Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, or collaborative effect, inclusive growth with the sustainable development goal. So but here I will also like to put one point, like time to time there is a review process that is carried out, such as in September 2019, head of the state and government gathered at the United Nations headquarters, like to follow up and comprehensively like review the process in the implementation of 2013 agenda for the sustainable development goal. And there they review like what were their achievements, what were the target, what has been done. So it was like a review event. This event was the first UN summit on the sustainable development goal since the adaptation of the Sendai Framework agenda in September 2015. Similarly, here I would like to add that similarly as in sustainable development goal, we also in Sendai Framework, in May 2019, the global platform for disaster risk reduction was held. And here like various critical component of the monitoring and implementation process of the Sendai Framework for disaster risk reduction was discussed. And for your climate change adaptation, in 2019, again, 2019, UN Climate Action Summit was held in UN headquarters in September 2019. So during this summit, during this climate summit, it was, the theme was Climate Action Summit 2019, a race we can win, a race we must win. That was the theme of the 2019 UN Climate Summit. And actually, in this summit, they were reviewing what has been achieved by the countries. And that's all. Thank you. Ananya?
Thank you, sir. Next question is for Dr. Prince Solomon.
Yes,
sir, what are the parameters that are followed before withdrawing from disaster hit areas?
Usually when we talk about disaster, there is 3 R's we say, and rehabilitation. So during a disaster situation, there are different agencies that function at different point of time. The first one is the rescue. That is where the NDRF and certain missionaries, they come up with their work. So the rescue is over, and then the relief camps will be done. So during relief camps, again, the government and non-government agencies plunge in to work. And then comes the rehabilitation phase. So now that is very, very difficult to say that this is the particular time that we can move out. So some of the indicators are whether the people can manage themselves, or whether their livelihood is, that we are able to retrieve their livelihood options to a certain extent. Thereby, they will be able to continue their normal work. Now that is where the complete withdrawal, happens. After climbing one hill, you move on to another one. So probably I would say rehabilitation process is a long-term process. After rehabilitation, in the first 1 or 2 years after rehabilitation, usually people will move out so that the people can, people are empowered, or their capacities are built, or the skills are they're required to stand on their own feet, or building much more resilience.
Thank you, sir. Sir, one last question for the session. It's for Dr. Prince Solomon again. Sir, how did the project incorporated and integrated into the traditional knowledge of the tribal village to design the program? Are there any examples?
Yes. Even when we started this the need assessment, I think one of the things that we there are 3 approaches when we work with tribal people. You want to take them out of their culture, whether you want to keep their culture and then do development, which is a very, very difficult task. And that is the approach that we took, where we don't want to tell that you come away from your culture, but we want them to be respected their own culture and their traditions. At the same time, we want to ensure that the development also takes place. It's a very difficult thing to balance. So that was the perspective. One example I would say is when we are building the houses. The usual way of building the houses is that, when you want to do it, you will always like to put a pakka, concrete roof, and then you want to make sure that they live inside that. So when we asked them, when we had the focus group discussions, they said it is better because a lot of times they cook inside their home. So it is better not to concretize, but better to put a thatched roof, which they are much more comfortable during a summer, and during winter they are comfortable. That is one example I would say. In their tradition, the side walls are cemented, but the roof is still their own pattern of building their house. That is one. Number 2, very interestingly, we were trying to bring in, I'm talking about 2016, we were talking about building toilets for them. For each house, there was a toilet. But interestingly, when we had a focus group discussion, when we prioritized, they said, we want a bathing room first, and then you build a toilet. The process is very different. That is because of so many other factors that they were giving. We don't have time to discuss that, but so actually we went on for a bathing room first, which they felt much more secured. Otherwise, usually the bathing room is just four sticks and a sari wrapped around that 4 sticks, and that's how they sit inside and have a bath. So the perspective was totally different, but we had to go along with them because it is ultimately their house, and it is their need, their felt need. I think that is where we try to incorporate their tribalness in achieving the development. There are lots of things I can go on and on. These are 2 things that is very striking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. This brings us to the end of our session for today. Without further ado, let's move on to the valedictory program. Right now, I would like to call Dr. Miriam Samuel, Head of the Department of Social Work, Madras Christian College, to moderate the valedictory session.
So good afternoon to all the participants and resource persons. I know we have come to the end of our 3-day international training program on crisis and disaster management, which was held from 9th July till today. As you all know, this is a joint venture between the National Institute of Disaster Management in Delhi and the Department of Social Work, Madras Christian College in Chennai. 2 institutes at 2 ends of the country, but virtually connected to come together and try to disseminate knowledge and training to different people. I think this kind of a virtual connection is only possible because of the mutual interest and commitment of both these institutions to work in the field of disaster management. Otherwise, I don't think with our different backgrounds and different agendas, we would have been able to carry this through. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know we draw the curtains to this webinar. And, we have officials from NIDM with us. We will also be listening to a few of them. But to start this valedictory program, with us again, Dr. Raju Tapa, who is a professional friend. We did listen to her ago when she spoke as a resource person, who will be giving a brief summary of the entire 3-day program. Dr. Raju Tapa has also been very, very involved in the entire planning of this program. And we just feel that we are all colleagues working together in this. And therefore, I hand over this first part of it to Dr. Raju Tapa to give her comments and a brief summary of this entire course. Dr. Raju Tapa.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity to give summary of the 3 days training program as jointly collaborated with NIDM and Madras Christian College, Chennai. As we know that crisis management planning is not only about being better equipped to effectively respond to specific incident. Developing a crisis management plan also helps teams identify potential threats as they plan and game out the task, communication and information need to deal with those threats. Our training program started on 9th July 2020, where the training program commenced with the inaugural address by Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, ED NIDM, and special address by Shri SN Pradhan, IPS, DG NDRF. This was followed by felicitation by Dr. P. Wilson, Principal and Secretary of Madras Christian College, and Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMRD NIDM. In the day, during our second session of the training program, the lectures were on role of youth in crisis and disaster management, which was discussed, was highlighted by Dr. H. Chow Hsing, Director, CJ University, Taiwan. This was followed by the presentation of Dr. Saurabh Dalal, NPO Emergency, World Health Organization, who highlighted the role of healthcare sector on disaster management. We were privileged to hear from Sri S.N. Pradhan, DG NDRF, on the theme on disaster response and preparedness. In the day 2, second session, we learned about the journalism and rehabilitation in the time of crisis and disaster, where Mr. T. Mayuran, founder and director, Center for Children Happiness, Sri Lanka, and Dr. Chindu Sridharan, principal academic in journalism, Bournemouth University, England. Now about day 3 of the training program. In the first, national and international policies by myself and by my colleagues, Mr. Raju Tapa and Mr. Anil Kattait from National Institute of Disaster Management. In the second session of the day, second session was focused on the effect of crisis and disaster on vulnerable groups in Nigeria as well as India, were discussed by distinguished speaker Mr. Sunny, environmentalist of Niger Delta region from Nigeria, and Dr. Prince Solomon, Assistant Professor, Department of Social Work, Madras Christian College. Before concluding, we pledge our support to PM 10-point agenda for implementation of the Sendai Framework, its goal and priorities. We commit ourselves to work with countries in the region to achieve the goals of the Sendai Framework towards a safer and resilient India. Thank you very much.
Okay. I do understand that our officials from NIDM are busy and it's difficult for them to join. But I think it is my duty as head of the department to give my concluding remarks before the vote of thanks. And we have been listening to a lot of concepts and a lot of knowledge that has been shared over the last 3 days. And when we planned for this program, it was our endeavor that this will not just be a conference or sharing of knowledge, but rather sharing of also experiences. So a lot of us can take back some of these experiences back to our own professional settings, wherever we are, either as teachers or as practitioners, social workers, doctors, government and non-governmental organizations, etc. I think I just want to, my concluding remarks, just give a few pointers for us to go back with as food for thought when we complete the session. The most important thing that I feel we need to keep in mind is how in a crisis and in disaster management such as these, being proactive is very, very important rather than being reactive. Very often we are very reactive, but listening to all the speakers and all the different policies and programs that are in place in a country like ours and globally, I think it is very important that we are proactive because disasters have come to stay. We know the number of disasters have increased over the last number of years, especially in 2020. Just in 6 months, we've seen number of disasters in our own country. And therefore, I think it is very, very important that we have to be proactive. So in being proactive, what are the things that we need to keep in mind? And I have about 4 areas that I think all of us can work together and focus on. One, I think a holistic approach in what we do and not a piecemeal approach. So when I say holistic, I think it is important for us to look at the psychosocial, economic, physical, and spiritual context of any crisis or disaster. Very often we respond to all this in a very piecemeal approach. We respond to the physical aspect, for instance, or economic, and we never look at it holistically. And even in this COVID disaster in India, we have realized how we have failed sometimes to respond to the disaster and the crisis from a holistic approach. So I think it is very, very important that we respond from a holistic approach rather than a approach. Secondly, I think it is very important for us to build community resilience in a proactive approach, because if we build the resilience of the community will, and the community will have the capacity to bounce back and to handle the disaster. So building community resilience in a proactive approach is very, very essential. Thirdly, I think an inclusive approach. We just listened to vulnerable groups spoken of. And very often, we only address vulnerable groups after some time, after the relief measures have started, after we've responded to what is happening. But I think it is very, very important that in a crisis situation, we have an inclusive approach, very especially take into consideration vulnerable groups and how their needs have to be met. And finally, we need to respond from a strength-based approach rather than a problem or a deficit model. Understanding that communities have strength, understanding that communities have their own indigenous knowledge systems. They have coped with disasters, and they do have the inherent capacity, worth, and dignity to cope with disaster. So I think it's very important that we look at disasters from a well-being model rather than a problematic or a deficit or a disease model. And I think the COVID has taught us that any disaster has a global and local or a local and global connection. And therefore, we are all connected globally and locally. The local can impact the global scenario, and the global scenario can impact the local scenario. And we need to learn from each other mutually in order to respond to crisis situations and disasters. I think we've even seen in these 3 days, we've listened to stories from Malaysia, from Sri Lanka, from Indonesia. We've listened to stories of experiences from people in UK and India and Nigeria, and from Irula community in a remote hamlet in Tamilnadu. And therefore, I think this local, global, and global, local connection, the global connection, is very, very important when we talk about crisis and disaster management. And therefore, dear participants, in my closing remarks, this is what I would like to stress, that we as professionals, as volunteers, as interested individuals and people committed to responding to crisis and disasters, we really need to take a proactive approach and commit ourselves to dealing with these issues that are there around us. I think very especially vulnerable groups. Look at the plight of children. Look at the plight of women. Look at the plight of the poor. Even in this COVID situation, the number of suicides that have increased, the number of rapes that have increased, the poor who are struggling, the joblessness that is there. I think we cannot be complacent in a situation. We cannot sit, not understand the vulnerability of the, and therefore an inclusive approach, looking at the needs of all groups, is very, very essential in a crisis and a disaster situation. And I would conclude with beautiful words of our own Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhiji said, "Be the change that you want to see around you." So if we want to see situations changing around us, we want to see people responding to crisis and disasters in a much more responsible way, we need to be the change that we want to see around us. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I pray that God would give us the wisdom to handle situations like this. I pray that God would protect our country and the global context in a situation that we are in. I pray that all of us will continue to stay safe so that we can work together and commit ourselves to fight the situation that is there around us. Thank you very much, and God bless everybody.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Sudarshan.
Yes, ma'am. At this juncture, it is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. This is a very good privilege for us as a Madras program. I, on behalf of Madras Christian College and the National Institute of Disaster Management team, crew, and special guest, like Executive Director of NIDM and Director General of NDRF, and especially Dr. Surya Prakash, NIDM, Principal Madras Christian College, Dr. P. of social work. We call it a fraternity of social sciences and the humanities here together, and very hearty thanks to you guys for doing your important work and sharing with us your findings and opinions on these days. I must mention our very deep sense of appreciation for our working team, Dr. Ajit Goar and Mr. Raju Tapa and Mr. Anil Kattait, the young professionals of National Institute of Disaster Management, and our own students. They're the backbone of this program from Madras College. We thank everyone for being with us for all these 3 days. It has been a very great pleasure for us, and thank you very much. We'll join in another program. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we've drawn the curtains to this webinar, and I thank the team from NIDM and Madras Christian College for working together as a team to make this happen. A very special thanks to Dr. Sudarshan, Dr. Harjit Kaur, and Mr. Raju Tapa, Dr. Surya, and very especially my student team. Without them, this would not have taken off. Thank you all very much. Stay safe and God bless. Thank you.